Ding, ding, ding. Ding, 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 ding. Hello! Cool. So I'd really like to welcome Lydia to talk to us tonight. I met Lydia, so I found out Lydia through Instagram, as we do with all of the speakers. And I met Lydia before Christmas, and yeah, just, I'm not going to say anymore, but just what an incredible story. And I really feel really privileged to have Lydia here talking to us all tonight and to be joining us at a Cloud Club night. So thank you, Lydia.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Excuse the notes, but just in case technology fails, I always like to have a backup. Does it look all right?
It's working.
Awesome, yeah. Thank you very much. So I'm sorry I'm videoing this as well. Thank you all for coming this evening. That's really nice of you all to come along. So I'm Lydia, and I am, let me just try to click her out for the first time. Oh, right. Who am I? So I am a psychologist. I am a coach and NLP practitioner. I'm training counselling, mindfulness and attachment theory, and I have my own business, Velvet Evolution. I'm also a food scientist, so the first time I went to uni I did food science, the second time I went and did psychology. I also previously had a corporate career, working for various brands, food brands, beauty brands, things like that, which was a great career until I woke up one day and realised that I didn't really care who bought my face cream. I just didn't think it was going to change their life. And what I realised at that time was that what I really enjoyed about the job was the people management side, the developing my team, the individuals and that side of things. And that's where I kind of realised that the reason I'd probably been doing marketing for so long was because really I was interested in people and psychology. So I went back to uni and did that instead. I am also a trustee at Safeline. I brought some Safeline leaflets and information along this evening just because the nature of the talk tonight, as you will have seen from the advertisement, is about childhood sexual abuse. And from that point of view, please do look after yourselves. The statistics tell us that there are going to be people in this room that are going to be affected by the story tonight. If for any reason it's for you or for someone that you know and you feel triggered by what you hear this evening, please feel free to just look after yourself, you know, if you need to leave the room, whatever you need to do to make sure that you feel safe. If you hear information tonight and you feel that you or someone that you know, male or female, would probably benefit from some support, some professional support, there is all the Safeline information over there. Please do feel free to take some of that information with you so that you can obviously contact them and get the support that you need, or to pass it on to someone else who might need it as well. So I'm a trustee at Safeline. I've been a trustee there for, gosh, I think it might be coming on 8 years. In fact, bizarrely, I'm now the longest standing member of the board, which is a very weird thing to be. I'm also chair of the PTA at my daughter's school as well. But on top of all of those things, the other thing that I sadly am is a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. And that's the story that I'm here to talk to you about this evening, about what happens to people when that's what happens to them in childhood, and how do you overcome those sorts of things. So, keep going. What I like to do at the end/start of every year is take a moment to kind of review, actually, what have I done in the last year? What have I achieved? What did I hope that I would do? And what do I plan for the year ahead? Not necessarily saying it's all going to come true, but I did this at the start of this year. And I also took the opportunity, because it was the start of a new decade, to have a look back on where I was 10 years ago. So, having a look at today. Let's go in. Thank you. There we go. Yeah, that's cool. So, where am I at today? I would say that I am happy, content, supported, powerful, empowered, should be a few more to come, connected, there's quite a list of them, sorry. Thank you. Healthy, aware, present, self-employed, a volunteer, a friend, a parent to a daughter and a dog. I'm proud, I'm hopeful, I'm confident, and I'm self-caring. So that's where I would say that I am at in my life today. But if I look back, see if it's going to work. It's not liking it, is it? Sorry. You might have to click for me. Right, where was I a decade ago? Well, I was lost. I mean, genuinely just lost. Didn't know who I was. I was a victim. I was absolutely waiting to be rescued. I was scared. I was lonely. I was searching, bored, trapped. This is all at the time that I was in my corporate career as well, so there's a little bit of that going on. I was sluggish, depressed. I was an employee. I was very dissatisfied, very sad, always dreaming, looking to others. I was a marketeer. I was quote unquote successful, and I was accomplished. I was all of those things and absolutely convinced that no matter how broken I was inside, someone or something outside of me was definitely going to be the solution. And I would try anything and everything to find what that thing was. So the difference is this little girl. This is me when I'm 3 years old. This is little Lydia, and back in 2010, I had no relationship with her whatsoever. I didn't particularly like her, I didn't know her, she just wasn't a part of me, of my life in any way at all. And yet, she is the source of fun, she is my intuition, she is my strength, and we all have an inner child. And what tends to happen for most of us is that we get so busy growing up and taking on responsibility that we completely forget who we came into the world to be, and we lose that connection with our inner child. So building a relationship with her is the thing that's made a difference from 2010 to 2020 to all of those words that were on the screen before. The only reason they changed is because I've developed a relationship with her. Now, the reason I lost my connection with her, for me, is predominantly because I was sexually abused as a child. Now, unfortunately, the statistics are that it's 1 in 4 women, which is 8 million women in the UK, and 1 in 6 men, so 5 million men in the UK, that report being sexually abused. What happened to me was never reported because nobody knew. So when I think that that's the reported numbers, the people who have the opportunity, the strength, all of the things that are required to go and report to the police and actually have it recorded, because there are people that report to the police and it doesn't get recorded. So those are the statistics, and that means that's the tip of the iceberg. So unfortunately, my story isn't one of isolation, but it is one that these statistics carry a lot of myths with them. They carry the myths that it only happens to children in lower socioeconomic backgrounds, that sexual abuse is carried out by strangers, and that if this happens to you, then actually you're going to be broken for the rest of your life. And part of the reason that I share my story is to kind of challenge some of those myths for people. So my background is that I grew up in a really, really nice, leafy, suburban area. It was very middle class. We lived in a white house that was detached with 4 good-sized bedrooms, excuse me. we lived in a cul-de-sac with a golf course at the end of the road. It was a nice affluent area. Both my parents worked. I have still. This was actually us. There's some great photos coming up, by the way. So this is me, my mum, my dad, and my older brother. So this kind of what you would consider perfect little nuclear family. 2 working parents, good income. We weren't spoilt, but we certainly didn't go without in any way at all. And yet, everything was just not quite what it seemed. So, between the ages of 3 and 7, I would periodically be left with a family member. Somebody that my parents completely trusted, somebody that my parents believed loved me just in the same way that they did. And when I would be left with that person on my own, my parents would go off shopping, they would take my older brother with them. I was a little bit younger, so I stayed behind. And when I was left alone with this family member, I would be sexually abused. So it started at the age of 3, and it went all the way on to the age of 7. When I was 7 years old, I one day said to my mum, I don't want to be left here anymore. And despite the fact that my mum said, why? Why don't you want to be left here anymore? I wouldn't say. Because I didn't know what to say. Because I was 7 and I didn't know about body boundaries. All I knew was that there was a secret and I wasn't supposed to tell anybody. And if I did tell, I was going to get into trouble. But I knew that what was happening wasn't okay. I didn't like it. And I knew that I didn't want it to carry on. So in my own way, I tried to put a stop to it. What also happened at this time was between the ages of 3 and 7, I went through quite a period of being quite convinced that I was adopted. And I remember being in the bath and saying to my mum, yeah, but I was adopted though, wasn't I? And that's just a sign of I just didn't feel like I belonged. Something was wrong. And in a way, I probably didn't want to belong. I also, because I'd started school during that period of time, I had always been, still am, a very big fan of food. And would eat anything and everything that was put in front of me. Because my abuser used food as a reward, I then started to reject food. So having been a really good eater of my school dinners, I then went through a massive phase of, I'm not eating this anymore. Now I can look back on that now and say, well, that was a huge cry for help. That was a child whose behaviour was significantly changing and was asking someone to say, why? Why don't you want to eat this anymore? Because you used to. But nobody did. And so what starts to happen is I start to lose connection. Because when the abuse is happening, what happens in my brain is I start to dissociate. So I remember the abuse happening, but I also remember at the exact same moment being down the end of the garden and playing in the garden. Because in my head, that's where I went to. And that's the point when the disconnect within me starts. And even as a child, I begin to lose that sense of self. So from the age of 7, I wasn't left with that family member ever again on my own. And so they lost their opportunity to ever abuse me again. Then, growing up, what then starts to happen is I have a really weird sense of self. So I then really struggle with friendships, because friendships just don't make any sense to me at all. Because I can't really understand how to relate to people, because that part of of my development has got broken because somebody that I should have been able to trust turned out to be somebody that I couldn't understand. So I then had a really tough time at school, making friends, keeping friends, and sustaining any sort of relationship, because actually they were all quite threatening to me, because why would I trust anybody ever again? When I was about 12, I went to stay with some other family members, people that I absolutely adored, people that I'd stayed with lots of times, with my parents, without my parents, just people that were my absolute world. And unfortunately, what happened to me is what happens to so many other people who have been abused, which is one night I went to bed and the male family member came up to say goodnight, but instead of leaving, got onto the bed with me and said almost the exact same words that my first abuser had said to me. And in that moment, my brain just froze, as did my body, because I thought, well, I know exactly what happens next. All I remember after that is the female caregiver calling him saying, "What are you doing up there? Come down, your tea's getting cold." And he disappeared. I then had 3 more days to spend with them on my own. So the next morning I went down and I just couldn't even be near him, because he had been my absolute world. And I just didn't know what to do anymore. So I spent the next few days almost stuck like glue to the female family member until my parents came to pick me up. And I now remember sitting at the top of the stairs when my parents came to pick me up, and all the adults were downstairs having a chat and this, that and the other. And I remember sitting at the top of the stairs thinking, if I say anything about this, it will absolutely destroy my family. Because I don't know if anyone will believe me. I don't know how much trouble I'm going to get into. But I can't upset everyone. So I chose not to say anything. And my parents took me away and we went back home, and that was that. And what my brain then did to save me was it just eliminated every memory of that completely. And I had no idea that it happened to me at all. I then obviously continued through school and found school and friendships really, really difficult. I got bullied a lot because I was vulnerable, because kids pick up on that. And you know, I at secondary school had to get moved out of one class into another because some girls had decided to make everyone in the class stop speaking to me. And so everything was just that little bit harder because it just never quite made sense to me. When I was 16, I told you there's some good pictures on here. When I was 16, these were the girls that I was friends with at the time. 2 weeks before my 16th birthday, the first abuser died. And my reaction to that was anger. And I didn't know why, because my brain had kind of gone, yeah, we're not going to remember that, thank you. And I remember throwing my alarm clock across my bedroom wall, across the bedroom, hitting the wall and thinking, oh, that's an interesting reaction to someone dying. And then shortly after that, I started to get flashbacks. And the first time I ever had a flashback, I remember being in a friend's car and driving up the road to the house that I grew up in. And just this image coming back into my head and being like, oh my God, that's, ooh, horrible. Why would you think that? That's horrible. You know, and completely took it on myself. Until it happened again and again and again. And then I realised, oh my God, this is real. And from that point on, what then started to happen was I couldn't handle that. I couldn't handle that on my own. I was 16 years old. I didn't know what to do with that information. I wasn't going to tell anyone because, as far as I was aware at that time, this is on me. So I tried to carry on as best as I could. The second year of my A-levels, I was in such a bad depression that I barely went into college. I just went in to hand in assignments and pick up the next assignment. I was pretty anorexic at that point, trying to survive on about 300 calories a day and walking everywhere that I could, because if there was less of me, then that had to be a good thing, because then there was less of me to hate. And that continued until I went to uni, where, I mean, that is an amazing picture, Lord. Why do I do this to myself? I went to uni, and whilst I was, 1 week before I went back to uni, in that summer holidays, the second abuser died. And that was a really tough one, because everybody in the family, this person was like the link between everybody. And so everybody went into full-on grief mode, myself included, because in the intervening years, I had tried to have a relationship with that person, a familial relationship with that person, where I pretended they hadn't done what they'd done that one night when they got on the bed with me. I tried to make it right for him. And so when he died, I found that really, really hard, because I missed him. I missed the idea of him, because he had been this one really, really safe male figure, and then he'd done something that had completely undone that, and I didn't want that to be true. So I tried really, really hard to pretend that that hadn't happened, so that we could go back to having the relationship that we'd had before. So he died, and we grieved, and I went back to uni, and I got more and more depressed. And so my solution to the depression was my career. So every 18 months to 2 years, I would change everything, because after about every 18 months to 2 years, the depression was so strong that the easiest thing for me to do, the coping strategy I'd come up with, was change job, change where you live, change everybody in your life, start it all over again. Because if you start everything from scratch, you're so busy having to deal with all of that, you haven't got time to be depressed. And then just as that would start to normalise, then the depression would come back in again, and I'd go, right, time for a new job then. Hence why I moved quite a few times during my career. Also during this time, I'm beginning to fall more and more out of love with the career that I had chosen anyway. The other side to this is relationships, because sexual abuse massively affects your ability to trust. So in terms of relationships, when I was 15, I started my first long-term relationship, which went on for the best part of 7 years, with a really, really lovely guy. And we just kind of grew apart, and that's what happens sometimes. But it was whilst I was with him that I first started to get the flashbacks. And it was whilst I was with him when I was 19 that I told somebody, a counsellor, for the very first time that I had been abused. And that first time I sat in a lounge with that counsellor, and she said to me, you know, what is it that you want to talk about? I genuinely felt like the words would kill me if I actually said them. It was that overwhelming to actually have to say for the first time, I think I was abused as a child. So that then ended up playing a part in all of my future relationships as to whether I trusted men, how much I tested them. It's like, if you're going to be in a relationship with me, you better bring your A game, because I am going to test you every step of the way. I'm going to challenge you, I'm going to push you away. I have the most ambivalent attachment style, or did have back then. So my first relationship was about 7 years. After that, I was then single for quite a while because I don't trust men. I'm very depressed and I'm working all the time. I then met somebody else, and we had a good relationship, but I was becoming more and more and more depressed, and it was really having an impact on our ability to just connect. And my emotional responses were then starting to go off the chart because I couldn't necessarily cope with things not being within my control. And it was during that second relationship, so around about turning 30, that I first started thinking, do you know what, I'm either going to sink or swim here, and I need to find some help. And that's when I first went and spoke to a therapist. What I found over time, speaking to a few different therapists, was that actually until I found somebody who specialised in what I'd been through, it was never really going to make the difference that I needed it to. The relationship broke down when I was in my early 30s, and I got the opportunity to go and work abroad when I was working for Beiersdorf, working for Nivea. And so I basically ran off into the sunset with somebody else who was the colleague that I was working with. This guy's reputation completely preceded him. And I didn't care, I was game. And that relationship was so toxic and so codependent and really, really broke me. He ended up moving to the US and I ended up joining him over there. And it was a really, really miserable 6 months. We had spent 2.5, 3 years traveling the world for work together and had some amazing experiences, but it was a real toxic combination of can't live with, can't live without. And we were going to wring out every last second of that time that we could together, and almost destroyed each other in the process of doing that. So he moved to the US. I then went to follow him. That meant that I left my career in the UK. It meant that I emptied my house of all its furniture. It meant that I got tenants moving into my house. I sold my car, and I moved over to the US to be with him. And it was very apparent from day one that this was not going to last. And we dragged it out for 6 months, at which point I came back to the UK. And I was at absolute rock bottom. I had no career, I had no job, I had no car, I had other people living in my house, and I had to move back in with my parents, who I then had to explain why my life had gone quite so far down the toilet as it had. It was something that I had never wanted to share with them. I'd never wanted them to know. I'd never wanted them to have to deal with it, to have to deal with what I thought would be inevitable parental guilt. but I had to explain what was going on for me, because up until that point, my life and everybody in it were in silos. And I actually had no idea who I was. I was whatever person needed me to be that was in front of me. And I had to start making amends for that, for my own sanity. So whilst I say that I was at rock bottom, I guess what I really mean is that little Lydia was at rock bottom, because she at that point had spent the best part of 30 years trying to survive in an adult world that she hadn't got a clue about at all, where relationships didn't make sense, men were mean, and she was pushed to make all kinds of decisions that she wasn't equipped to make. So this was the point where I found SafeLine. SafeLine are a Warwick-based charity that specialise in counselling for people that have been sexually abused. Whether it's historical, current, it doesn't matter, they will support you. And I went to them and they got it. They got me. And I then spent several years in and out of therapy with them, in one-to-one therapy, in group therapy, just learning to unpick all the pieces that had got broken along the way, some of which I had entirely voluntarily gone into and some of which had happened to me. But it is definitely with thanks to SafeLine that I'm even sat here today. Because without that specialised help and support, I'm not quite sure what decisions I would have made and how tough it would have got. And that's why I am now a trustee with them, because that's my way to give back to them. So the connection that they taught me was how to learn to love and like this little girl who was a complete victim, who was completely innocent, and who I didn't really know. And so, as I said, you know, she's the difference between those 2 decades for me. The start of those 2 decades is learning who she is, learning who she was meant to be, giving her a voice, which is why I talk about this, because it's for her. Because at the time it happened, she didn't have a voice, and she didn't think anyone was going to believe her. Out of that came me finding my vocation, having spent a long time of, I don't know, I'll do something that I'm vaguely interested in, but I don't really get what vocations are all about. What I realised at that point of being in rock bottom was that one of the finest skills I had ever developed throughout all of this was, whilst I found relationships really confusing when they came at me, I was incredibly good at sitting and listening to other people. And that was how I had actually built most of my relationships, was just by being the person that sat and listened. I thought, well, hang on a minute, I've just spent a few years with people that have sat and listened to me. Maybe there's a connection there. And so that's when I went back to uni and did my psychology degree and all the other additional qualifications that I now have, and set up my business as a confidence coach and psychologist to help people with all sorts of different aspects of their life. This isn't just about sexual abuse, it's just about if you're not feeling connected with yourself, what can you do about that? How can we help improve those things? So I set up the business and I moved back after a couple of years of living at my parents' house at 31. Very interesting, but needing to be reparented at that time whilst I was going through the trauma of everything that had happened to me in childhood. I moved back into my house, got my furniture back out of storage, finally broke the ties with the guy that was living in the States, who was still hanging around 3 years later. And I took on my first bit of responsibility, which is my lovely dog Coco. And that was the first time, I guess, for both me and for little Lydia, that we had a place that was really our own, that everybody in our life knew what we'd been through, everybody knew the same version of me, everybody knew the same story, and she was the first step towards my family. I've had Coco now for 7 years. She is a rescue. We don't know her history, other than she was found in Ireland tied up. But she's lovely. And then the next part of my family arrived a few years ago, when I decided that I really, really was ready and wanted to become a parent. And I wasn't in a relationship, and I wasn't fussed about having a child of my own. So I spoke with social services and decided to become a foster parent. And I went through that process. It took about 6 months, and I was approved, and 2 weeks later I had a phone call saying, "Any chance you've got that spare bed set up yet?" And I was like, oh God, why? Thinking, oh no, this is the moment it becomes real. I said, "We've got a little girl. She needs a placement straight away this week. Would you consider taking her?" So I said, okay, because that's what you're supposed to do as a foster parent. And this beautiful little girl with brown curly hair walked through my front door on a Friday. I had the phone call on a Tuesday, and she walked through my front door on a Friday. And the plan for her was adoption. And the second she walked through my door, I thought, you're not going anywhere. That's my daughter. So we started the process, and later that year, we got matched and approved, and then the next year we went to court, and she is legally mine. So we are now a little family of 3. Me, the dog, and the daughter. Came in a slightly different order to the one that most people expect. But that's us today. We are a family, we help each other out, and that's another huge part of why little Lydia is such a big part of our lives as well, for all of us. And connecting with your inner child is something that I talk a lot to my daughter about, as well as the fact that we don't have secrets. You can have surprises, but you don't have secrets. Surprises have an end date, and that's why they're surprises, because at some point the person will know. But secrets aren't something that we ever have to keep. So if somebody asks you to keep a secret, you just come and tell me. So I guess I saw this on Instagram, of course, and it really struck a chord with me. Your wound is probably not your fault, but the healing is your responsibility. And I think sometimes that can feel like quite a hard place to get to, because we all have wounds. And I'm not here to compare my wound with any of yours at all. I'm not saying that my wound is the worst by any stretch of the imagination. And my wound was never my fault. But actually the healing was my responsibility. And the pride and the empowerment that I get from having healed it myself, from not having continued to look outside of me for that, is immense. And that's the energy that I hope to project forwards as well. So when we look back at all of the things that I feel that I am today, this, I guess, is the outcome of the work of the last 10 years for me. But just to come back to those myths, sexual abuse happens to children in lower socioeconomic classes. I hope that I've helped you realise today that unfortunately it's not the case. It happens everywhere. It happens in Warwick, it happens in Leamington. I know we wish it didn't, but it does. It happens throughout Warwickshire. Just because a family looks lovely on the outside, it doesn't mean that there isn't something going on. That's not to say that you have to look and raise your eye at everything, but it's just to say don't think it doesn't happen on your doorstep, because unfortunately it does. That sexual abuse is carried out by strangers. This was something that was really big when I was little, which was, don't take sweets off strangers, don't talk to strangers. What we know now is that actually, unfortunately, sexual abuse is predominantly carried out by people that children know. That by people that will put themselves into a position of power or of contact with children, because that's what they do, is they build a relationship, they groom them, and they start to help to convince them that the next step they want to take is either the child's idea, or it's normal, or it's special, and all of these sorts of things. So sexual abuse, it isn't really carried out by strangers. People who don't say anything at the time must be lying when they make accusations years later. It's not true. Your brain protects you. It will only make you aware of what's happened to you at a time when it believes that you can actually deal with that information. Otherwise, it will keep it shelved away for a long time. I know many stories of people who have had flashback moments or recollections of being abused that have been in their 60s, their 70s and their 80s. There was one lady who was in her 80s who went to stay at a holiday cottage. And this holiday cottage had very old-fashioned shutters on the windows. And as she went to shut them, she suddenly started having flashbacks to her childhood where they'd had similar shutters on the windows. And up until that point, she was in her 80s. She genuinely hadn't remembered that that's what had happened to her. So we have to remember that if people do say that something happened to them a long time ago, there is every chance that that is true and that they genuinely didn't remember before then. And then also that if you were sexually abused or raped, you will remain a victim for the rest of your life, and a little piece of you will forever be broken. I hope that in what I've shared with you tonight of my story, I have gone some way to proving that that's not the case. You can always get back to who you're meant to be. It might not be easy, but if you put the work in, it's absolutely achievable. What I would like you guys, I guess, to take away is no matter what wounds you have, no matter what difficult times in your life you have been through, and again, in absolutely no comparative way at all, but difficult times can be the making of you, not the breaking of you. And I think it's important that we do hang on to that. I would ask you to absolutely embrace and work with your inner child. Go home, find a photograph of yourself when you were little and think, what was she like? What did she like to do? Who was she? Who did she think I was going to be? And see if she wants to come out to play. Because for so many people, the only time their inner child ever comes out to play is when they've had a few drinks. And it's such a shame. Because actually, she's there ready to play all the time, if you just remember that she's there. And just remember that those times when you feel fear, when you feel stuck, lonely, or in overwhelm, check in with your inner chick. Because it might be her that's saying, do you know what, I haven't come out for such a long time, and I'm finding this adult world really, really tough right now, and I'd just like to have a moment where someone goes, oh, I remember you. You were good fun, weren't you? What can we do that would be good fun, and then get back to doing the adult stuff as well? A lovely quote from Cinderella that I say to my daughter all the time: have courage and be kind. That's all we need to do every single day, is just have courage and be kind. And if you have been through something more challenging and difficult, speak up and speak out. Because as we're seeing more and more, and I think as the two ladies that have already spoken tonight have said, you know, we have the power within us, and we need to start talking about the more difficult subjects and making them more normal. So if we break the silence, we will break the secret at the same time. And then finally, embrace your vulnerability. Whatever you think are the bits of you that are not so great at that, or that makes me feel really uncomfortable doing that, embrace those things, because that's actually where all your strength and your power is. Vulnerability is not a weakness. Vulnerability is all of your strength. And listen to yourself, and then listen to others, because you have incredible intuition inside all of you. And sometimes we go too much on what other people think, and we actually need to just spend a bit more time listening to ourselves and actually what feels right for me. Thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate your time this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. Like, really, thank you from like the bottom of my heart, because that's just to be able to, like, the strength to get up and tell your story to people cannot be easy to go over that every single time. So thank you very much. I've got lots of questions. Does anybody have a question?
When you said that the first abuser, when he died, you were angry.
Yeah.
I'm assuming, well, I am assuming, that was there anger at the fact that he was now gone and you couldn't bring him to justice for what he'd done, and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, it probably was anger, yeah, in terms of, yeah, that he'd got away with it and that I could never do anything about it. And because both of them died before I ever told anybody, certainly my parents or anything else, so it wasn't a situation where I could ever go to the police. That was something that I had to kind of work through in therapy, which is, you know, a lot of people talk about forgiveness. I think there are some things that we just don't have to forgive, and I think this is one of them, because I was an innocent child, and what they did wasn't about me, it was entirely for them, and at that moment I didn't even exist to them. I was just merely an object that got them what they wanted. And so the anger is definitely, at that time, was that they got away with it. Right now, it's not, because everybody knows what they did and everybody in my family knows what they did. And I realised, as much as I didn't want to have to tell my parents, the longer I didn't say anything, the longer I was actually complicit with the secret. And so that's what I had to do. But I had to work through a lot of that to kind of figure out, how do I feel about them and how do I move forwards when actually they're not alive, for me to try and get justice back. Yeah.
Sorry, I started out with a very go-in-there question, but also thank you very much for sharing.
Oh, that's okay. That's all right. Don't worry. I didn't take that at all, but thank you.
But no, thank you very much.
Could you tell us about the different reactions of your parents and your brother, and when you told them what had happened? Because to be told something that you didn't have any clue about in those different roles that they had, what was that like for you and for them?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. I guess the thing that I'm always aware of is, every time I tell this story, is I don't know what it's like to hear this story. So I don't know what it's like for you. I don't know what it's like for my mum to hear this for the first time. So the day that I went to tell my parents, I remember leaving my house and genuinely thinking, this could be the day that I get kicked out of the family. I could tell them this and they could go, absolutely not, you're lying, that's disgusting, get out. That was my genuine thought, but I just thought, I've got to do this. And so I went over to my parents' house and I asked my mum to come and help me sort something out, and so I told her first. And I said, the reason I've come over is because I was supposed to be travelling a lot at the time, and I'd actually got signed off because I was so unwell with depression that I'd been signed off for 4 weeks. So I had to explain to them why I was going to be in the UK for 4 weeks when they were expecting me to be flying all over the place. And so I said, actually, I'm going to be in the UK for the next 4 weeks. I've been signed off. The reason I've been signed off is that I've got depression. The reason I've got depression is this is what happened to me when I was little. My mum was really upset, and I'm extremely, extremely fortunate because both of my parents believed me straight away. But my mum was upset, but as my mum does, she was super stoic about it as well, and oh my gosh, that's awful, dear, and let's
have a cup of tea.
Yes, absolutely, and all of those sorts of things. And I said, look, will you help me tell Dad? And so we went down to the lounge and we called my dad in, and my dad doesn't do emotions, so he finds me a very weird creature. And we called him in, and we were sat down in front of the fire, and Mum sort of led the conversation, and then I said, this is what's happened to me. And bless me, burst into tears. They have struggled with it since. So I told them, I then went round and told my brother later that evening, who also, I'm from a family who none of them do emotions, so I'm very much a fish out of water with my family. And he was very kind of like, right, yeah, okay, right. And I was like, yeah, that's going to take a bit of processing. I'm going to have to come back to you later, I think. But I then actually ended up going back to work about 8 weeks later. And because I'd gone back to work, my parents tried to switch back to how things used to be. Because what they wanted was, oh, she's fine now. She's gone back to work. She's on this big high-flying career. It's all good. Don't need to worry anymore. It was a blip. And so it was very hard for them to then have me come back and say, actually, I need to come back and live with you guys for a bit. And they then had to live with watching me try to build myself back up from nothing again. And that was very hard for them, and I didn't do that to punish them or anything like that. It was where I needed to be. But yeah, it was not an easy day, but I couldn't have asked for more than being believed, regardless of whether they could comprehend it or not. The fact that they believed me was the most important thing.
Did you ever worry that it might have happened to other family members?
Yes, absolutely. I've got, I asked my brother, and he said it didn't happen to him. I have 2 slightly younger cousins who used to spend a lot of time with the second abuser. And so it took me probably a couple of years of therapy before I then went up and spoke to their parents, who I have a really good relationship with, and explained to them actually that I've had a lot of depression and this is why, and that I am extremely worried in case anything happened to their daughters. But they've spoken to them, and they've both said they genuinely have no memories, they don't think it happened to them at all or anything like that. And we're all still very close, and so again, I was believed. But yeah, I carried around the guilt that it might have happened to them for a long time, because I was thinking, well, I was 12 and I'm 32 when I'm telling their parents, oh my God, what if it had been going on for years for them? So yeah, it's difficult.
Anybody else?
When you were 7 and you said to your parents, your mum, you didn't want to go to the first abuse anymore, and then you said you didn't stay with them anymore after that on your own, did your mum not question you at that point? Was there any? I'm just wondering, because if my daughter, like you said, he was a trusted member of the family and you went all the time, if they suddenly went, oh, I don't want to go to them anymore, I don't know, it would raise in my mind, and or maybe I'd pass it off and go, oh, don't be silly, come on, they're fine, and you love going there, sort of thing. How did it just sort of stop? Was it, do you remember, or it just didn't?
I remember saying to her at the house, I don't want to stay here today. And I don't remember the fine details, but I probably must have been quite insistent, because she did say, well, why? Because she sort of took me out into the hallway and was like, well, why don't you want to? I wouldn't say.
No.
I wouldn't say, because I didn't know if I'd be relieved. I didn't really quite know what to say, because I was 7 and it had been going on since I was 3, so really it was the only relationship I'd ever really had with him.
Yeah.
And I just didn't really know why I didn't like it, but I just didn't. And so I wouldn't say, I wouldn't give her a reason. So I guess the best that she could do at that time was just say, okay, well, and then I'm not going to make you stay. And just accept it, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think there's so many times when whatever it is, you know, don't want to eat food, your children say don't want to eat that, don't want to go there, don't want to do this, and as a parent you kind of, oh, come along now, you know,
Yeah.
and just makes you think of it in a very different light now.
Just thinking like, you know, if you've got work, you know, you've got it today, I've got to go to work, or whatever it might be. You know,
Yeah.
just, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. It is.
Yeah. Thank you, first of all. How do you deal with trust now? Obviously, you've got a daughter. Do you let her have sleepovers and stuff like that? Because that, I imagine, is
No.
really hard
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of why I took a long time to become a parent, because I had to make sure that I was in a place where actually I could be a parent rather than I really want a baby. And I guess the people that I have in my life now are really, really safe people. Like, I am an excellent judge of character. I can spot a wrong one a mile off, because I found enough of them to kind of go, right, I really am good at finding these. But I guess there's 2 sides to that. One is my daughter's only just started trying sleepovers anyway because of her history, because she's adopted, so she comes with her own past as well. And that would only be with my parents, and I trust my parents because I know them and I know how they treated me as a child as well. But it was definitely something for a long time, and interestingly, for a very long time, when I did think about having children, when I was in different relationships, I only ever imagined myself having boys, because I was so disconnected with little Lydia. There was no way I could have a daughter, because that would just be way too triggering for me. So the fact that I've ended up with a daughter who walked through my door one day and I was like, oh my God, that's my daughter, is you know, just, I guess, fate or whatever, or just a sign of where I've got to. But for me, it's about doing what's right for her at the pace that is right for her. But I make sure that yeah, she would only ever be with people that I trust. But equally, actually, she's quite slow at learning to trust as well, given her history. So it works quite well, I guess, from that perspective. If that answers the question.
Did you have a question?
I did hear you. Thank you for the speech. I did hear you saying you tell her every day, we can have surprises, but we don't have secrets. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yes. So basically, you're telling her that she can keep something for a small amount of time and surprise you with something that you're not expecting,
Yeah.
but you don't have secrets that she never shares with you.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
I mean, I'm incredibly honest with her in an age-appropriate way, but you know, I'm not saying that it's necessarily going to work 100% when she becomes a teenager.
Oh, you're spot on, yeah.
but it's instilling it in now, so that actually, if it does come to her having a secret, it's going to weigh more on her, which is, I know I shouldn't be doing this.
No, it's fine for me. Yeah, okay. I got you. Okay. Thank you.
feel about approaching relationships now? Now you've got your family unit. What's your kind of current situation, or how do you feel about it?
I guess the last few years have been a little bit of a head down, let's get on with things, just because, you know, it's been being a parent, it's being a parent to someone who's had a parent before, and there's all sorts of things that go with that. But in terms of where I am within myself, I'm very open to it. There isn't anybody significant at the moment. That's probably more down to time and the fact that I only leave my house for work of an evening, and not a lot of social life. And again, that's because it's leaving my daughter with the right people. But yeah, it's not something that I shy away from at all anymore. I feel super fine with meeting people and being a good judge of character, and kind of being like, yeah, I know when there's a connection and when there's not, and it doesn't, none of that feels a threat to me at all anymore, which is a really nice place to approach it from. So yeah.
What are you most looking forward to about the next decade? What's 2030 look like?
Oh, that's a really good one. Wow.
With a teenager.
Yeah, yeah. Surviving. No. I don't know actually. I would probably say being part of a blended family would be an expectation for 2030. For my business to still be growing and perhaps diversified a little bit more, and having a kind of portfolio career. But I guess a lot of the same words still being up on the board that were there now, really. Yeah.
Does anybody have any more questions? Could you just shout a little bit louder?
How did you sort of connect back to your first inner child?
Yeah.
Was that a difficult thing to do?
Yes.
How did you do it?
It was a really difficult thing to do, and a lot of it was through therapy, because she was really, really hurt, and she was the person that was really mistrusting of people, and so there were all sorts of different things. Some of it was spending time with, as it was at the time, spending time with like my best friends' kids and stuff like that, and actually just playing with them, because I hadn't played for years, because I kind of stopped playing as a kid. Because I lost all of that imagination, because actually the world turned out to be a hell of a lot more scary than I'd ever expected it to be. So some of it was kind of like, I guess, you could kind of call it play therapy, but it was kind of with my godchildren and stuff like that. But other things were about being very consciously aware in work situations of, actually I'm in control of this. There's an adult me, there's a parent me, and there's a child me. And the child me needs to know that I've got this. Or if I'm in a relationship, professional, personal, familial, whatever it is, actually, again, the adult me can manage this difficult conversation, this area of conflict, or whatever it is, and just almost reassuring her. And some of it was that there were times when I had to imagine that she was there and that I could give her a hug. And just say, it's okay, I've got this, as if she was a real child. Because what she really needed was, she needed a nurturing parent, which is something that she just hadn't really been apparent in her childhood for various different reasons, and that was what she really needed. And I had to kind of step in to do that and nurture her, whilst then saying, look, don't worry about the adult stuff, I've got that, and kind of, it sounds a little bit weird, but almost like sort of splitting that in, that sort of conversation inside my head, and saying, look, you don't need to worry about this, I've got this is an adult thing, I'll deal with this, and then we'll go off and we'll pick up the godchildren later and go and play with them, and that'll be your moment, kind of thing. So it was a very conscious process to have to really think about the fact that she was a part of me, and she'd been in the driving seat for way too long and was completely shattered and overwhelmed. And I had to say, actually, that's the bit that you come out with, I'll do the other stuff. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, no, you.
Okay.
Sorry, I've got more people.
Did your parents took kind of the responsibility? did they felt responsible for it? Right or wrong, I'm not judging that, but did they felt responsible for it?
Yes, I'd say that they did. I'd say my parents are excellent at what do you need us to be right now? We'll deal with our stuff when you're not around. So I probably didn't see how much it crushed them because they wouldn't show that to me.
Would you like to? And I'm not saying you, of course you have to answer, but I'm saying generally, do you think people would like to see? Would that give them some kind of, not gratitude, but like acknowledgement of, we are the parents, we are responsible for you, and as you said, the 3-year-old kid was left not with their own willing to go, for you to go through that, but it was not your responsibility, so it's the adult's responsibility.
Yeah. I don't know that that's necessarily something that my parents would be emotionally equipped to be able to do. And I think it probably depends on the person, because I think for some people, if their parents came in swooping, then their parents are going into rescue mode, and that's then somebody coming from outside to rescue you and go, right, I've got all of this, and actually the hard part is that you do have to do the healing yourself. But then I think there are perhaps other more practical ways that my parents showed their support, because that's what they're more comfortable doing.
Yeah, I guess the kind of the not questioning anything showed that perhaps it then connected a load of all those things that just create a picture that hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? But we all miss things and look back and actually pulling a picture together and going, and that for you is that's that acknowledgement, that's that the fact that nothing was ever questioned just shows that they're taking that on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was very clear with them right from the first time I told them, which was I at no point have I ever felt that they were responsible. At no point in any way at all did I think that they should have suspected, have known of anything. Were there signs as I got more and more depressed where they were cries for help, for someone to say, hang on a minute, what is going on with you? Like, you're disappearing, you're sleeping a lot, you're not going to college, all of those sorts of things. You're extremely thin, all of that. They were the times when I wanted them to notice me, and they didn't. And I've worked through that in terms of, look, they give the best that they can, and they just give in different ways than what I need. But yes, I think in other ways I felt very supported by them. And my mum is babysitting tonight, knowing that I'm here doing this. So
I think the work that you do in Safeline is wonderful, and you've told me previously about some of the events that you've been to and the golf days and things where you're talking to audiences of women, audiences of all men, and the impact that you're having, and that just must feel really empowering to be able to go and share your story to make a difference to other people's lives and give them strength.
Yeah, it is. It's interesting because it's a balance, because every time I tell the story, it's re-traumatizing. So there's a bit, which is why I keep the notes here in case my brain just goes, you're not saying this today. Like, you've got, that's it, you can't access that information anymore. But equally, I know that every time I do it, I get so much stronger because it puts all the blame back onto the abusers, and it's not anything to do with me anymore. So it's just striking that balance of not pushing myself too hard, but equally getting stronger every time you do.
Cool. I can't remember whether you said when the first abuse happened, did you block it out?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, but did it then when the second abuser then
He re-triggered it.
it brought that back?
Yeah.
Then did you block it again?
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Not consciously at all.
Yeah.
That was just my brain going, I have no idea where to file this. We're going to stick it way at the back. Yeah.
Our brains are just incredible things, aren't
Absolutely.
they?
They're
you're
there to
always
protect us. They're there to keep us alive. And mine was like, I don't know what to do with this. you might die if this stays at the front of your mind. So I'm shutting that far, far away until you can cope with it.
And we do it all the time, don't we? Like, I think like if I vividly remember my first childbirth, I would have never had another one.
Yeah.
But you put things away, don't you? And I think it's just being aware of like triggers of whatever they are, of wounds that we've got or things we've been through, trying to be aware of them. And I think the thing around vulnerability is very topical at the moment, and about showing your vulnerability and equally being aware of others around us. And I think we are in a time now where there are so many more things that make it more difficult. We talk about social media as of earlier, where it make things much harder for many people, but equally we're also in a place where people are much more encouraged to share and to talk about things, which can only be a good thing. You think sort of 15 years ago, if this was you now 15 years ago, nobody would want to talk about it.
No,
it would be, you can't talk about that sort of thing. It would be a kind of taboo. So that's so much more positive that we are in a place now where stories like yours can be shared to help the people.
Yeah.
So thank you ever so much for being here tonight.
No,
We just
thank
have
you.
Thank you very much. And thank you everybody for coming tonight. And hopefully we'll see you at another Cloud Fem event in the future. So just one more round of applause for Lydia and for Victoria.